Hey folks, looking to get a bit stronger, looking to get a bit leaner during this COVID-19 lockdown? Hey, if that's the case, it's totally doable. Don't think because the gyms aren't open that you can't make it happen. If you want to start the conversation, if you want to get something made, tailored just for you with the situation that you're living right now, don't be shy. Drop me a line, dave@davemorrow.net, or head to my website at davemorrow.net. And let's start that conversation, man, and let's get you into the Facebook group and let's get you sorted. All right, today the show is brought to you by a bunch of awesome veteran-run businesses. So I'd like to give a shout out to my good buddy Yannick at Commodus, a boxing club located in Perth, Ontario. They love to train people from beginners all the way up to competitive athletes. Their workouts are super hard but adjustable so everyone can do it and get something out of it. Kids, teenagers, adults, seniors, they work with everyone, and it's a great way to remedy anyone with ADHD. They're always on the lookout for new ways to train to make it more fun and challenging. You can even compete once invited to. You can have an idea of what they're up to by watching a few of the workouts on their Facebook page, and that's at Commodus Boxing Club. That's COMODUS Boxing Club, and that's in Perth, Ontario. Or you can head to www.commodusboxingclub.com or Commodus Boxing Club on Facebook or Instagram. Next up, Devo FX. Devo FX are your all-in-one special effects makeup shop. From casualty simulation with emergency first responders to creating creatures and props for your next big feature film, Devo FX have the experience and the skill to see your project through to completion. Devo FX have done a multitude of applications on many of your favorite actors for several feature films and television programs. Owned and operated by Canadian Armed Forces veteran Mark DeVoe, Devo FX offers a sculpting for veterans class, giving veterans struggling with PTSD an expressive outlet. These are just a few reasons why Devo FX is suited for your next project. Go check these guys out, man.
Jeff Alpa here from Jeff Alpa Custom, home of the world's most dangerous dress shirts. I am a big fan of the Hard to Kill podcast, and it's because it's all about mindset. That hard to kill mindset, and the best way to be hard to kill is to be the threat in your environment. You do this by being on the front foot mentally, physically, visually, and across all other planes. What is a dangerous dress shirt? I'm glad you asked that question. A dangerous dress shirt is a dress shirt that is custom in both fit and design. This means that you are wearing you and not what somebody else is telling you to wear. Guaranteed to make you a force of nature that is happening to the world in any room that you enter, and not some mere creature of circumstance. Check us out by Googling the world's most dangerous dress shirts. And if you want to know how I became hard to kill, check out episode 18 of the Hard to Kill podcast. Enjoy the show.
Folks, the Canadian Walk for Veterans is an opportunity for Canadians, veterans, first responders, and civil servants to walk shoulder to shoulder in celebration of the contributions made by the men and women who have served with pride, dignity, and courage in the name of Canada, both past and present. It is an event where veterans, their families, their friends, and all Canadians come together as an organized and harmonious community in pursuit of an understanding of the challenges veterans face transitioning and thriving in life after service. So if you want to check out and participate in this year's Walk for Remembrance, head to Facebook and type in Can Walk for Vets. So that's CANWALK, the number 4 Vets, VETS. Check it out, like the page, and register for your Walk for Remembrance this year. And lastly, we've got Jane Wood of Nourish the Moment, or the Mindful Nutritionist. Jane Wood does not do meal plans. All right, fellas? She doesn't do a meal plan for you. She's going to look at the root cause of why you're stuffing your face, of why you can't get a grip of your nutrition, why you're having those tasty cakes at all times of the day. She's a mindful nutritionist, so she's going to make that mind-body connection for you. That's pretty cool if you ask me. So if you want to go check her out, head to Jane Wood on Facebook, and she'll be sure to set you up with a plan that is tailored for you. So head to nourishthemoment.com. That's NOURISH, the THE moment, MOMENT.com, and let Jane sort you out. There's nothing you can do that will improve your performance faster than sleeping well. On the flip side, there's nothing that will break you faster than poor sleep. And we all know that modern life can be exhausting. In fact, I just heard a new stat that over 40% of doctors' visits today are due to fatigue. Sleep deprivation isn't just a problem, it's an epidemic. If you can relate, then strap in, because I have something truly life-changing to share with you. Since 2006, my friend, Dr. Kirk Parsley, has been at the forefront of sleep medicine. A former Navy SEAL, Kirk started his work as a physician working for the West Coast SEAL teams. It was there that he encountered an intense health sleep crisis. 80% of his SEAL patients who were on the front lines of some of the most demanding and dangerous situations in the world were chronically sleep deprived. After months of trial and error, Kirk developed a solution that actualized some rather amazing and eye-opening results. Lucky for us, Kirk recently made his sleep remedy solution available in the US. And guess what? Right now, starting today, he's offering 10% off his sleep remedy teas and capsules. So head to go.davemorrow.net/sleep to find your special offer today. Today's episode is with none other than Doc Parsley. So Kirk Parsley is a former Navy SEAL. Additionally, he is a medical doctor and has devoted his life to the study of sleep. I've been following him for years, and additionally, I used to use his stuff to convey how important sleep was to my grade 9 students when I was teaching high school. He is a font of knowledge and is so well versed in everything sleep related. So I think you're going to really enjoy this episode, especially if you're having sleep trouble, especially if it's service related, but even just being a normal human being and putting things in the context as how important sleep is to ensure that you regulate your hormones and just regulate your life for optimal performance. This is the episode, guys. So sit tight and enjoy episode 31 of the Hard to Kill podcast with Doc Parsley.
Welcome to the Hard to Kill Podcast, the go-to podcast for military, LEO, and EMS professionals, sharing ideas and experiences from around the world to make you hard to kill. Here's your host, Dave Morrow.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting here with Dr. Kirk Parsley. Really honored to have him on the show today because Dr. Parsley is actually one of the first podcasts I ever listened to. So shout out to Wes Kennedy. His podcast from years back had you on. And ever since then, I implemented the stuff that you've been talking about, especially setting up your sleep hygiene and also showing that and letting my grade 9 students in on a little bit of your research, because I think it's critically important for what we're experiencing now, especially in the West, sleep deprivation and just unbreaking yourself when it comes to sleep. So Dr. Parsley, Kirk, good to have you on. Really appreciate you talking to me today. How you doing? And could you let the listeners know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, that's a mouthful. Thanks for having me on. And thanks for listening. It doesn't do me any good to stand on my soapbox and preach if no one listens. And it's just awesome that you're, teaching that to high school kids. I've actually done a lecture series just for school systems to try to get that, to get the counselors and teachers and administrators and all that to understand the value of sleep. So it's really exciting to hear that somebody's actually digging into that at that level. So I don't know. How far do you want me to go back about me?
Great question.
Back in 1970.
Back in the 80s, kids. So how about, well, first of all, you're a doctor, which is awesome. And not only that, folks, but a Navy SEAL, which
That's pretty badass. How did you go from, were you a doctor first and then a Navy SEAL, or Navy SEAL then doctor?
No. So I joined. So I actually dropped out of high school. I was a terrible student. Essentially failed out of high school. So I spent 4 years there. I was a sophomore by credits with about a 1.3 GPA or something. So
Wow.
I decided I'd had enough high school. I was really just there to hang out with my friends and chase girls and race cars and all that stuff. So I joined the Navy to do this thing called SEAL training, which no one had ever even heard of. But apparently it was supposed to be the toughest training in the world, and I considered myself a good athlete and a rugged guy, and so I wanted to go give it a shot. Obviously made it through. Did about a little under 7 years all up, and got out. So actually I started dating the woman who would become my wife while I was in the SEAL teams, and she was in grad school getting her master's in physical therapy. This is before the doctorate in physical therapy was a thing, really. And when I would go on deployment, this was the Clinton administration, so we didn't have any war. I mean, we had the Gulf War. I take that back, but but whatever. Like, we had a lot of downtime in deployments. You've been in the military, you know how that is.
Right. Yep.
It can be. And so I would take her textbooks with me to on my deployments, and I'd read her textbooks on kinesiology and physiology, and I just loved it. I'd always read and studied that type of stuff, nutrition and exercise physiology, but really just to make myself a better athlete, to make myself stronger and faster and all that. And so I thought, well, maybe I could do this physical therapy thing, and I was in California, and Fresno State had an entry level master's. So since I didn't even have a high school diploma, it was going to take me a while to get through college, much less a master's degree. So, I was already getting married. So it's like, man, I'll take this kind of quick path. I think it was like 5 years from the day I started till the day I was going to graduate with a master's degree, and then I'd be employable. So I thought, yeah, that'd be cool. And I started working I started volunteering at San Diego Sports Medicine Center, which, I don't know if it's still the same, but back then you had to have 2,000 volunteer hours just to apply to PT school. So I figured I better start getting that in. And then they hired me after I'd been there a couple of weeks, and I became a PT aide. Pretty quickly decided I didn't want to be a physical therapist. But we worked, San Diego Sports Medicine Center was just this, sports medicine mecca. We had every kind of healthcare practitioner you could imagine, from strength and conditioning coaches to massage therapists to doctors to sports med to ortho to even had an orthodontist. Like, we had like everything you can imagine for sports and performance. And so, over my time in college, I was working there and getting to know all those folks and getting to see what they all do for a living. And one of the doctors there just talked me into throwing my backpack over the wall and trying to get into medical school, which I just thought was ridiculous. I'm like, I'm not even a high school graduate, dude. I'm not going to get into medical school.
Right.
And he's like, well, the question isn't will you get in? The question is, would you go if you got in? And I was like, all right. Kind of put the screws to me on that one. I'm like, all right, yeah.
Sound reasoning.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm like, all right, yeah, if I got in, I'd definitely go. So he's like, well, why wouldn't you try to get in it? I'm like, all right, good point. So I found out, I was already, by this time I was already married. I guess I'd had one kid. I was going to school full time, working part time, and my wife was working full time, and it's the young busy life. But I found out when I was applying, I had no idea, but when I was looking at schools I was competitive for, I found out about the military's medical school in Bethesda, which I had no idea the military had their own medical school. Found out they would pay me to go to medical school instead of the other way around. And I'd come out with no debt. So, how the military goes, everything's trade for time. So if you go to, the military's medical school, essentially 4 years, then you owe them 8 years of service as a doctor afterwards. So I was willing to make that trade and figured I'd get back to the SEAL teams. And, I did. I got back to be the SEAL team doc in 2009, and then I stayed there until I got out in January 2013. So. And while I was there is really when I developed all this work around sleep and my interest in sleep, because those guys, I was obviously very well versed in sports medicine, but what they needed me for there was something different. And like when I got there, how the military is, like, especially spec ops guys, they, the worst thing you can do is put them on the bench or, give them a diagnosis that makes them weak in their mind or in the minds of their peers, or makes them incapable of their job. So, they just hide stuff and don't really come clean, but they came clean with me and they told me, hey, here's what's going on. And, 100 guys came and told me the same thing within a couple of months. And none of it was disease. I was a medical doctor, trained in America. So all I knew how to do was recognize and treat disease, recognize, diagnose, and treat disease. I didn't know anything about performance, which was what their issues were. Like they just weren't doing as well as they thought they should, but none of it met the criteria of disease. And after a lot of fishing around, I determined that the most likely culprit was their lack of sleep, and their drug-induced sleep, because they were taking sleep aids and alcohol and everything else they could to try to get some sleep. And that just led me on my little self journey to figure out what was going on with them and how could I improve their performance. And the sleep seems to be a big deal. How can I convince them that sleep's important? And then how can I help them sleep better? And can I make any changes to the community to help them perform better, to help them get access to enough sleep and the right times of days and all that stuff. So that was 11 years ago, and still beating that same drum. Mm-hmm. And still working with a lot of spec ops guys, and work with a lot of entrepreneurs and professional athletes and all that kind of stuff now, just to optimize performance, really.
Right. So I like this topic of performance, and you identified that the guys in teams and they felt something was off too. And you mentioned, kind of like as a doctor, your goal is to treat and then observe, and then if it gets better, great. If not, okay, treat again. But the whole preventative measures thing was something that was kind of foreign. So when somebody is experiencing like a performance decline, they're training hard, whether they're spec ops or not, they start seeing that decline happen. They feel something's off. How do you ascertain that it's actually sleep that's their issue, that's bringing their performance down? And what does a lack of sleep contribute to with respects to decreasing performance?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is really interesting, because when when they first came to me with these performance issues, being a reductionist, Western trained doctor, I was like, all right, well, there's got to be a hormone that's off or something. There's some sort of metabolic thing that I'll be able to find. Maybe it's a vitamin deficiency or mineral deficiency, or maybe it's, heavy metal toxicity, or, some sort of poisoning from overseas, or maybe it's, adrenal fatigue, or, but there had to be like some external thing for me to explain all of this. And, as I started going down all those rabbit holes, and, all of that stuff exists to some degree. I didn't really tie in the TBI component until about maybe 2 years into it.
Sorry, that's
traumatic brain injuries. Yeah. And I would say it went something like, these guys were coming to my office and they were telling me, I'm getting fatter and weaker and losing muscle and losing strength and losing physical performance. That was kind of like, I'll put that all in kind of one category of just like a shift of body composition, despite the fact they're working with a nutritionist and a strength and conditioning coach, and, very regimented lifestyle. And then they'd also complain of cognitive stuff, right? So there'd be memory issues, there'd be attention, focus, even motivation, what we call lability, and in the medical terms, this means that you're highly emotional. Like you can get really down really easy, you can get really angry really easy, and like everything in between. And so I was just basically testing everything I could possibly test for. And the military wasn't a big fan of that. I got in a lot of trouble for doing too many labs, but I was doing literally almost 100 markers, almost 100 blood markers. I think it was 96 or 98 blood markers. And I was just like, hell with it, I'll look at everything. And I did notice this pattern, that they all had low testosterone, they all had high estrogen, they all had high this protein in your blood called sex hormone binding globulin, which basically binds sex hormones and makes them inactive. So that was really high. Their inflammatory markers, so like it's called the HSCRP, would be really high. Their oxidative markers would be really high. Their fasting blood glucose and insulin sensitivity looked like a pre-diabetic, even though they're really healthy, strong, athletic guys by most people's standards. So, none of that made sense, but I was like, well, there's something about this combat. There's something about the toxicity of their environment that's leading to them, having all of these deficiencies. And of course, this was kind of the beginning of the vitamin D3 craze too. Like all of my guys were deficient in vitamin D3, which makes sense because they work at night, sleep during the day a lot of the times. And when they do go out there in the day, they're covered in, their uniforms and kit. So they aren't getting enough sun exposure. And so, I started initially I just wanted to, go in there and put all those things back. Like I want to put their testosterone back. I want to put, I want to lower their estrogen. I want to lower their sex hormone binding globulin. I want to increase their testosterone. I want to increase their vitamin D3. I just wanted to go in there and fix it all, but the military is not about to let me do that. So, a long-winded way of getting to your question is, at some point during all of this, I realized that the concept and science of Occam's razor, the solution with the fewest number of assumptions tends to be correct. And sleep could, and I wasn't naive enough to think that it would, but lack of sleep or poor quality of sleep actually could explain every single symptom. Every single complaint that I was getting could have been explained by that. So I was like, wow, let me dig some more on that. And then they let me start lecturing to the community to try to get people to sleep. But there's still a little bit in the back of my mind going, they really need to improve their hormones, and they really need to improve their thyroid function and their testosterone, all of this other stuff. But this is just a way for me to get to talk about that, like all their anabolic behaviors of growth hormone and testosterone and DHT and DHEA and like all this stuff that I knew was motivating to them and we knew was associated with performance. It's almost like a sleight of hand to talk about that under the guise of talking about sleep. But then as I started studying more and drinking my own Kool-Aid, I'm like, oh, it actually is all about sleep. And now, a decade later, there is absolutely nothing. There's absolutely nothing that you do or don't do that affects your life as much as sleep. Your performance. Wow. I mean, it is by far the most important factor. Like orders of magnitude more important than nutrition or exercise, or even vitamin mineral deficiencies. None of that matters if you're not sleeping well. And if you're sleeping well, that normalizes a lot of that stuff. So, so to answer your question, when I start working with somebody, if they're having performance issues, the first thing that we do, I don't care what else they're doing in their life, and I don't care how well they think they're sleeping, but the first thing that we do is we assess their sleep, and that means some sort of real metric to it. So it can't just be the subjective experience of, I think I get enough sleep. Like I want to know how much sleep you're getting. I want to know how often you get that, how often you get short sleep, what's the quality of your sleep, how do you feel when you wake up, all of this type of stuff. What time of day you're sleeping, obviously that matters as well. Because when somebody comes to me to work with me as a one of my private clients, they have a performance goal, right? And it might be, smoother emotionality to deal with their kids. It might be better mental clarity and focus and problem solving skills to run their business. It might be they're a professional athlete and they need to get, put on 10 pounds of muscle and get a quarter of a second faster. Like, it could be a military guy, spec war, it could be a law enforcement, like it could be anybody. Doesn't matter. I don't care what their performance metric is. Sleep affects everything, because the only time you actually get better at anything is while you're asleep. You learn a skill during the day, you solidify that skill and actually put that into practice and associate that with other regions of your brain so that you can access that and you can compare it to other things that you already know, and you can integrate regions of your brain to act on that information. That all happens while you're asleep. As most people know, when you exercise, you don't get stronger. When you lift weights or run, exercise intently, you actually damage your muscles, right?
Right.
You're ripping muscles open. Like, you're literally rupturing cells and you're damaging it. What happens when you sleep is a highly anabolic period where you recover. And when you recover, that muscle comes back more capable. Those cells come back more capable of doing whatever you're stressing on them. So if you're doing endurance work, they come back better at oxidative phosphorylation. They increase their mitochondrial density or whatever it is that, whatever mechanisms they need to adjust to that work. Hold on to creatine stores if you're more of a power athlete. Increase the thickness and number of, connections. You can't increase the muscle fiber numbers, but you can increase the thickness and the contractility of those, and the nerves change, like the resting nerve potential. How many muscle fibers do you fire with one unit of nerve fiber or fire in that area? All of that stuff changes drastically when you start aiming for physical performance. And that's probably the easiest thing to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knows when you get enough rest, when you recover enough, you get stronger, or you get faster, you get more capable. You can't go in and say, I want to have an 800-pound squat, so I'm going to do squats every single day until I can do that. Dumbest plan ever, right? Your squats are going to go down because you haven't had enough time to repair. Well, if you'll buy into the fact, this very true fact, that 99% of all the repair is actually happening while you're asleep, you'll realize that shorting yourself sleep is the dumbest thing you can do. I mean, unquestionably, if you want to reach your goal, which it wouldn't be a goal if you didn't want to reach it, right?
Right. That would be insanity.
Right. So, it doesn't matter. Again, like, if it's how quickly you learn, how well you problem solve, your emotional stability, your, what we call the prefrontal cortex, which is like essentially your simulator, which allows you to make decisions, project into the future. What's the most likely consequence of this decision? If I do X, if I do Y, what's the most likely outcome? Like, that's what makes us the smartest animal on the planet right there, right? Because we can project, we don't actually have to do it. We don't have to jump off of a roof to know that it's a bad idea.
We can visualize that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we can go, okay, well, that area of your brain doesn't work as well when you're sleep deprived, and become more impulsive, and you take bigger risk. And if you've ever stayed up for like 36 hours and remember your behavior, how you were driving, if you drove, or how you interacted with people, like the things you're willing to say to people when you're sleep deprived, like, being a doctor, going through medical training, working call, doing every third night call in the hospital. I'm very familiar with becoming completely inappropriate at like 36 hours of being awake. Happens all the time, happens to everybody. Another big area for people is that their nutrition isn't that great. Nutritional deficiency is fairly rare if you're actually paying any attention to what you're eating, right? Like, if you're somebody who's trying to eat well, nutritional deficiency is pretty rare in America. Not to say you wouldn't have any, you wouldn't need any supplementation. But the important thing is that people tend to get off of their goals, right? They have a plan for eating. Everything's decided. They engage with and agree with the philosophy. They know this is what they want to do, and they can't make themselves do it somehow. Like, they just keep falling off. Well, all of your appetite is controlled by your brain, right? It's called the neuroregulation of appetite. So how hungry you are, how impulsive, with the drive to eat, and what you crave is all controlled by your brain chemistry, which is all balanced while you're asleep. So if you don't sleep well, you don't have good impulse control. You don't have good dietary control. If you short yourself just 2 hours of sleep, you sleep 6 hours a night instead of 8 hours a night. You will find, the science has found that you will eat about 30% more calories. About 80% of those 30% more calories are going to be carbohydrates. And if you're not on a pretty clean diet already, then they're going to be, probably very simple, refined carbohydrates. So, really, to answer your question, like anything that anybody wants to get better at, I first start with sleep.
That's insane.
And until your sleep is regulated, and honestly, like, I have I think a 9 or 10 page application to become one of my clients. In every single page, at some point on the page, and multiple times on many pages, says you have to be willing to sleep 8 hours a night. You have to be willing to sleep hours. Are you okay? Are you agreeing to the fact that you're going to need to sleep? And if you aren't willing to do that, you can't be my client. And I don't care if you think you're a super sleeper and genetically gifted and you don't need it. Like, you have to be willing to try it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So that was incredible. And I think every little nugget that you just talked about there, we could do a whole other episode. But so I want to summarize. Essentially, for a guy, I'm gonna let's say myself, I'm not sleeping. Essentially, I'm going to be fat, tired, dumb, and incapable of making good decisions. So overall, this is just a train wreck waiting to happen without getting sleep.
Yeah, fatter, colder, dumber, and slower. And if you look at what does it mean to age, what does it mean to get old, it's the same thing, right? Fatter, colder, dumber, and slower. And when you look at people's health declines, or people's sort of aging, perceived, both subjective and objective, their perceived rate of aging accelerates as they get older. Well, the other thing that accelerates when you get older is poor sleep, or decelerate sleep. So people tend to get start getting worse sleep around 50, and the decade, or actually the mid 40s kind of. And 45 to 55 is a hell of a lot more aging than 35 to 45, and then 55 to 65 is even more, and 65 to 75 is even more. And it correlates really well with how poorly people sleep. And I can't say definitively what the cause of that. I have a lot of suspicions, but people have this belief system that, you just don't sleep as well when you get older. Well, not necessarily true. Like, you can sleep well, you just have to value it.
Right, because that was going to be my next question. Is it a circadian rhythm thing? Is it strictly hormonal? What seems to be, well, let's just talk about the circadian rhythm then. How important is that? Because we hear it talked about a lot, and I have a general understanding of what that is. But could you explain just how does that circadian rhythm play into, us having a proper rhythm for the day, as soon as we wake up to the time we go to bed at night?
Right. So I'm going to wax a little philosophical with this one. So, it's a reasonable debate to consider whether we are a host for the bacteria in our gut, like our gut biome, or they, we're hosting them and they're living off of us, or actually we're living off of them. Like, it could go either way. And the point of that is that when you look at the evolution of life on the planet, every single cell in your body is essentially its own little living organism. Every cell in your body has the same functions, right? Like, it takes in nutrients, it eats, like we do at a macro level. So at a micro level, you talk about a cell, like it takes in stuff from the what we call the interstitium, the fluid around it. It brings that into the cell. It does a certain amount of work and changes, it affects the DNA expression. It affects what the cell does. Proteins get produced, it changes what you do with all these different molecules in and around the cell. And then the cell actually excretes some of that waste, right? And under certain conditions, that cell works faster. Under certain conditions, that cell works slower. And eventually, after kind of so many iterations, that cell actually dies. Now, if you take a single cell organism, you take a bacterium or something, right? And you expand that concept to, well, they live in these communities and they behave a certain way as a community. They focus on this and they value this, and this behavior leads to an overall environment change when these bacteria are dominant. Well, every cell in your body is communicating it's in some way with every other cell in your body, right? So they all have internal clocks. They're all trying to work on this rhythm that we call the circadian rhythm, which is just a job security word. It doesn't mean anything. Circa means about, and dia means day. It's about a day rhythm is all it means. There's no science in that. The concept is more scientific. So the concept is, if you took one cell out of your body, or a million cells, or a billion cells, or a trillion cells out of your body, and you put those out in some environment where they could continue living, they all have this rhythm in which times of the day they're doing more of something and times of the day they're doing less of something. Times of the day where there's more waste, times of the day where they're bringing in more nutrition than they're putting out, and vice versa. So, if they're generating heat, if they're trying to conserve energy, like all of these cells in your body have a rhythm. That's what we're calling the circadian rhythm, and they're all coordinated, right? So the cells in your liver, the cells in your eyeball, the cells in your heart, the cells in your cardiovascular system, like everything is coordinated. Now, a man's circadian rhythm, if there weren't any light, put him down in a cave for a month, a man's circadian rhythm is slightly longer than a day, right? So it's like 24 hours and 20 minutes or something. So over the course of a month, you'd be way off schedule, right? A female's is slightly shorter than a day. So again, you would still get way off schedule, but just for different ways of going about it. So the whole idea of aligning with the sun is to help coordinate every cell in the body so that they're all staying on schedule with the planet that we're riding around in. The host organism is the Earth, right? Like that's where we're getting all of our resources from.
Right.
We're part of that. We're sitting on it. So we have to be entrained with this world that we live on. And that's what's really gotten messed up more than probably any other aspect of life. And with regards to sleep, and there's lots of culprits, but this is one of them. One of the biggest ones for sure is that we now have electricity and we have artificial light, and we can make it light all day. We can make it light when it's midnight, right? We can make it cold when it's hot and hot when it's cold, and light when it's dark and dark when it's light. We can eat crap that has nothing to do with food that we just printed.
Cheese slices.
Yeah, and so we've kind of like taken ourselves off the planet, and then we're like, well, why aren't we getting along with this thing we call the Earth and the planet anymore? Why am I aging faster? Why am I not thriving on this planet? Well, because you've jumped off, right? You've decided you don't want to play certain games, and you don't get to decide that. There are games in life that have to be played, and so one of the most important of those is sleep. And when you have light going in your eyes, it changes your brain chemistry, which changes whether or not the chemistry in your brain gets your brain ready for sleep, and therefore coordinates all those other cells and says, hey, I know you're on a 24-hour and 20-minute schedule, but here, like, we're backing you back up 20 minutes because, the light's gone down. We're making ourselves go to sleep. And that's how we stay in alignment. And if we didn't have electricity, this would just all happen without thought. There's plenty of research done, and one that was relatively recent, I want to say it was 2013, 2014. There was a big study where they went out, I think it was in Cellular Biology was where it was published. They went out and they found, I think, 8 different hunter-gatherer tribes in the world that have never been exposed to electricity. And, they put little actigraphy, sleep trackers on them, and just let them go about their lives and just observed them. And every single one of them, every single night, fell asleep about 3 to 3.5 hours after the sun went down. And they all woke up right around the time the sun comes up. Nobody needed a clock. They didn't have a clock, right? That wasn't an option. And that's really what the circadian rhythm is about. there's kind of two things that's going on. And if you think about it evolutionarily, it makes sense. If you picture humans 1,000 years ago, obviously nighttime would have been more dangerous than the daytime, right? We don't see that well at night. People can sneak up on you. Animals can sneak up on you. It's not that safe of an environment. It's the best time to kind of to not be putting yourself out there, but it also makes you very vulnerable, right? Like if you're sleeping, you're more vulnerable prey than you are ordinarily, and we're already pretty vulnerable prey without weapons and tools. Like we suck as a predator, right? I wouldn't fight a raccoon, much less a cat that wanted to eat me, or a bear or something, right? So, if we could, it makes perfect sense that if we could have evolved out of this need for 8 hours of sleep, we would have, right? Evolution would have favored people who only needed 4 hours of sleep.
Right.
That hasn't happened, right? And there's millions of years of evolution that hasn't happened. So we obviously need this. It's critical. It's crucial. So if you entrain your brain to sleep by light, and then the other thing that happens by default, if you aren't going out and being active, is you become less active. Your brain becomes less active. They weren't watching televisions and on their computers and smartphones and all this stuff. They were maybe sitting around a fire at best, right? That was about the maximum activity they would have had probably at night.
Caveman TV.
Right. Exactly. So if you can override your circadian rhythm with light, and you can override your circadian rhythm with stimulation, right? So you can wear the blue blocking glasses and put that flux on your computer and whatever the programs are on your smartphones, and get rid of all the blue light in your devices. You can do all of that. But if you stay up late working on your computer, sending emails, watching highly emotive television dramas, murders, all this type of stuff, you can actually stimulate your brain to a pattern that's not conducive with sleep as well. So those are kind of the two sleep hygiene things that people like to wax on philosophical about, like all these little nuances of little things you can do. But basically, sleep hygiene is super simple. What would people have done 1,000 years ago? And if you can't think that way, think about kids. Like if you've ever had kids, or you've ever been a little kid, you'll remember that there's this protracted period of getting ready for sleep. You don't take a 2-year-old toddler who's banging trucks together, throw them in the bed, and turn the light off.
Right.
There's this long period to get ready for sleep. And why is that? Because we need that period. And for some reason, we think we don't need it as adults, but we do.
Yeah, my wife and I, we're currently in the middle of that, right? We have a 3-year-old,
right?
And bedtime is the routine. It's a routine, right. And he doesn't even need prompting now. He's on his way upstairs. He knows he's got to brush his teeth. He's got to put his PJs on. Right. The standard. And then our daughter is 6 months old, and my wife's got on a really good routine too. And it's just funny that as we get older, it's like, oh, I don't need that routine anymore. Right. I'll just do my thing. I'm kind of sleepy, but you know what? There's a sick show on Netflix right now. I gotta get this in. If I don't get this in, I am not going to be fulfilled. So
what I always tell people in that scenario, and this has worked 100% of the time so far, but feel free to feedback if you get something different. I always tell people, if you need to watch that one more episode of Netflix or whatever it is, go to bed on time, set your alarm an hour earlier, and wake up and watch it.
Wow, huge.
If you value it enough to stay up an hour, you should value it enough to get up an hour earlier. Nobody's going to set their alarm clock to watch another episode of Breaking Bad. Not going to happen, dude. Like, all of that.
We'll see. We'll put the test out. We'll put the challenge out to the listeners.
But you see, that's actually, if you think about it, that's actually a really good example of what I told you about your prefrontal cortex, your decision making, your simulator in your brain going, if I do this, is the most likely outcome. That gets worse when you don't sleep well. That gets worse throughout a wakeful period. So your prefrontal cortex works better in the morning than it does late at night. The longer you stay awake, the more consecutive hours you are awake, the more likely you are to make poor decisions. And then that impact is actually magnified by the fact that if you let's say you only, like, you're very regular and you get 6 hours of sleep every single night. If you get 6 hours of sleep every single night, you're awake for 18 hours, right? So every night at between 16 and 18 hours of being awake, you're making bad decisions. But guess what? When you deprive yourself of a couple hours of sleep, your performance, as far as, well, any kind of performance that you want to measure, but we're talking right now about cognitive emotional kind of processes, that gets worse every single night you short sleep. And there's been a lot of work done to where if you can compare people being awake for a consecutive number of hours. You've been awake this many hours, and now we're going to have you go do a driving test or a coordination test or a reaction time test or something along those lines, something pretty objective. And you compare that to people who are impaired by alcohol. You only have to stay awake about 20 to 24 hours max, but right around 20 hours, most people will perform as though they're right on the limit for blood alcohol.
Whoa.
And if you short sleep yourself 2 hours a night, after 11 consecutive nights, that's how you perform all the time. Like that's your new norm.
So wait, just to back that up. So can we safely assume that the majority of North Americans, or should I say majority? I don't know the research, but a large portion of North Americans are basically driving like they're intoxicated?
Yes. And there's very strong evidence for that. If you look at the number of traffic accidents and look at the number of fatal car accidents, it's orders of magnitude higher risk to be drowsy driving than to be drunk driving.
Wow. So drowsy drunk driving is even worse.
Yeah. So if you look at 19 to 24-year-olds, they're 3.5 times more likely to be killed in a car wreck from either them being drowsy or somebody else being drowsy and hitting them. 3.5 times more likely to be killed that way than they are from a drunk driving accident.
Oh, that's wild. That's crazy.
And if you look at something as simple as daylight savings time.
Right, which we just had the other day, which is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah.
Daylight savings time, when you pull back, you deprive everybody of an hour of sleep, you have a 24% higher risk of cardiovascular, or of a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, right? 24% increase in heart attacks. And I can't remember, I just put this in a lecture a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember the data, but it's somewhere between like 20 or 30% increase in traffic accidents on that one day, just one day.
That's so wild.
In 1 hour, you get 20% increase in auto accidents.
So this is getting rid of this is a public safety issue. It would just make sense as a policy. Just get rid of it. I mean, I know we're talking about it here in Canada because there's a few provinces that just don't do it. And it's just, why do we even do it? I don't even know why we do it. It's just one of those things like, oh, you lose an hour's sleep today. It's like, all right, why do I do this? And it just seems so bananas. And with the data that you're just presenting here, there's a compelling case just to get rid of it, because I don't see an economic or, health benefit to having daylight savings in any shape, way, or form.
No. And even, ostensibly it's about farmers, and even the farmers are like, this is stupid. I don't need this. Like, I don't like this.
Thanks.
What are you talking about?
I never really asked for this, but all right.
I mean, it really makes no sense, especially, how long ago was rural electrification? Like that was 100 years ago. So maybe it mattered then, but it doesn't matter now.
Right.
If you want to be really pissed off about this, I mean, it's way more aggravating to me that we do this to our kids, right? If you look at an adolescent, you look at a junior high to high school kid, their circadian rhythm actually shifts, right? They get a shift where they need to stay awake a little later at night, and they need to get up a little later in the day, because that's just where their cells are now aligned to in relation to the sun. And so even if they're living with, even if they were living without electricity out in the sun, they feel like going to bed later, and they feel like waking up later. So this isn't like some artificial thing about kids being lazy. That just happens. And if you look at the school start times, like some schools start like 7:25. So if they have a busing program, that means there's kids that have to be at the bus stop at like 5:45 in the morning, which means that they're getting up at 5. And you think that if you say there's a 2-hour shift, which is generous, it could be 3 to 4 hours shift. But if you say there's a 2-hour circadian shift, that would be the same as saying, well, you have to get up at 3 a.m. every day as an adult and start work at 4 a.m. And then tell me that you would be just as productive. Like you would actually get as much work done.
Right.
You would enjoy your work. No, you'd be worse. And we know this unequivocally. We've actually done studies where, because they were private schools, they had control, and they shifted the start time of the school back 45 minutes or an hour, like nothing huge, like 45 minutes to an hour later. Every single school that did that had fewer truancies, fewer disciplinary issues, higher GPAs, fewer injuries. And every school that did this had the best sports record in every sport the team had ever in the history of the school.
What
and
an edge.
We know this to be true. And there's an organization that's it's been lobbying in DC for 15 or 20 years. It's actually called Start School Later. If you want to support a charity, man, that's a group that I'm behind. And what prevents us from doing this is the lobbying of unions. The school bus drivers and the teachers' unions are the ones that are preventing this from happening. We are like poisoning our children. It's like saying, we're just going to give you a little bit of arsenic every day. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill you. Like, you'll live through this just a tiny bit. Like, why the hell would we do that as a society?
Yeah, that's wild. And I like the fact that you mentioned high school students, because having been a high school teacher, and I was at an all boys school as well, I witnessed firsthand just, we started relatively early, just after 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
But, and all things aside, like with respects to, having their phones in their room and their iPads and stuff like that.
Right.
Early morning classes were they were the worst, because it wasn't that they were misbehaving. There was no energy. It was just, I might as well have just turned around and talked to the board the entire time. So there's no interaction. Cognitively, they were done. And just anecdotally myself, when I went to high school, we started crazy early. I remember we were done our day at like 2:05, I think.
Yeah.
It was early.
I think we were done at like 2:30 or something.
Yeah. And I couldn't function. And I just thought I was late. I thought I was lazy. I'm like, I'm lazy. It's because, like back in the day, you'd be up, you'd take care of the farm, and then you go to school, whatever. And so I had this, for whatever reason, I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in the suburbs. I just had this in my head that, it's my ancestors were better than me, and I'm just a lazy piece of shit.
Yeah.
I can't get up and like function in the morning.
Well,
so
at least you had that. At least you had that inner critic driving you. I was just like, I'm too fucking tired to get up and go to school for. So I didn't. I'd stroll into school about 9 o'clock and be like,
man, no, I had to go hang out with my girlfriend and make out with her in the hallway. That was my motivation to go to high school, man. No other motivation other than that. Thank God. But okay, so let's rewind a little bit. You mentioned sleep hygiene, and that's a really cool concept, because again, during my time as a teacher, I really gravitated to that whole message that you were talking about, because I actually used your lessons and all the material and the content you were putting on the internet at the time. Based on that alone, I think I was able to kind of hit a nerve. And you mentioned earlier in our little chat here that if you want to improve performance, you need to sleep. And so I would talk to like the jocks basically and say, like, if you want to get because I would get the question, sir, how do I get big? How do I get strong? I want to dominate. I'm like, okay, well, go to sleep. They're like, no, seriously. I'm like, no, I am serious, And so, what does that sleep protocol look like? That sleep hygiene that you've put together?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's obviously evolved over the time I've been doing all this. The most important, what I have found unequivocally to be the most important aspect of sleep hygiene is motivation. You have to convince people that it's the most important thing, or they have to be convinced, whether you convince them or not. And by that, I mean, it's literally their number one priority. I guarantee you there's fewer than, 2 or 3% of people in the world that sleep is their top priority, unless maybe they have a sleeping disorder or something that, really they think about sleep all the time. So that's the crux, right? So first you have to convince them, well, you're going to get whatever you want, like you name it, like you insert in a blank here, you're going to get more of this, sleep better, and here's why, and give them the physiology of that. So, in the teams we had something, and this is old, I'm dating myself here because we'd say $1 million, which wouldn't motivate many people today, but let's call it $10 million. And I'll say, hey, I need you to do this. And you go, well, that seems impossible. Well, if I gave you $10 million, could you do that? You couldn't spend the $10 million to do it. Like, I would just give you a reward of $10 million if you could figure out how to do it. Yeah, I can figure it out. All right, well, then you can do it without the $10 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the same thing. If sleep is your number one priority, I guarantee you don't need me. You don't need you. You don't need this podcast. You don't need to reading books. You have a computer. You're motivated to sleep. You'll figure out how to sleep, right? So that's the number one thing. Now, if we're going to make things a little simplistic on people, which I like to do because, there's a lot of money in propagating confusion, and so I think a lot of this stuff gets too complex, and not everybody's doing it, for nefarious reasons, but it's really not complex, right? So what I talked about earlier, if you look at hunter-gatherers, if you think about evolution, you think about children, just keep all of that in your mind, right? The way we're designed to sleep is when the sun goes down, the light decreases in our eyes, that specifically the blue light, that starts changing our neurochemistry. It goes back through something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is like the master clock of the circadian rhythm to entrain all the other cells in the body. And one of the first things that gets produced is a hormone called melatonin, which most people have heard from. Melatonin doesn't cause you to sleep. It causes a bunch of other changes in your cells in your brain that then allow you to feel more sleepy and start doing your brain and body start doing things to get you ready for sleep, like decreasing your blood pressure, decreasing your heart rate, decreasing your body temperature, decreasing your lots of stuff. So all these changes start happening in your brain. One of the other major things that starts happening pretty early is the production of a neuropeptide called GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, GABA. And what GABA does is it lowers the resting potential of all of the neurons in your neocortex. And your neocortex is how you interact with the world. Your senses are in there, and then your ability to exert your will is all in your neocortex, right? It's the human brain that sits on top of the lizard brain. So when you lower that resting potential, it makes it harder for those nerves to fire, which means it makes it harder for you to engage your environment. If you think about what it feels like to go to sleep, there's a gradual sensation of not being as aware of your environment. And really that's all that we can say definitively about sleep, is that there's a barrier between you and your environment. You can be awoken past that barrier, and there's some predictable neuronal patterns that are happening while you're sleeping. That's what sleep is. So if you can't be awakened because you've drugged yourself to sleep, then that's not sleep, right? And if your barrier doesn't go up high enough to where your senses are still paying attention to your environment, you don't sleep. And that can be real or that can be imagined. So this is what stress does, because your mind's thinking about negative things. It's causing anxiety. It's causing an increase of stress hormones. It's making your brain more alert and more aware and more cautious. And it's taking you away from slowing down the neocortex with GABA. This is why you can be really, really tired, want nothing more than to go home and go to sleep. Your friend's talking into going out to have a couple of drinks. You've had a couple of drinks, which should make you more tired, right? Because it's a CNS depressant. And all of a sudden you're really wide awake and you don't feel like you need sleep anymore.
Yeah.
And that's because you've overridden the GABA system, right? You've overcome this, and you're doing it by paying attention to your friends and by watching television and by the loud music and, hitting on the opposite sex or whatever your preferred thing is, if you have to say that these days. So all sleep hygiene is the absence of those two things. Don't put blue light in your eyes. That's what the blue blocking glasses are about. That's what the different light bulbs are about. That's what the screen programs, the F-Lux on your computer, the screen stuff on your iPhone, the night setting on your iPhones and smartphones and all that type of stuff. That's about decreasing the blue light in your eyes. Therefore, the chemicals can change in your brain, cause melatonin to be produced. That causes further change of your neurochemistry. GABA gets produced. GABA starts slowing down your neocortex. You aren't as aware of your environment, and eventually you're not aware of your environment, and you're now what we call asleep. Your sense of smell still works when you're asleep. Your hearing still works. Your vision still works. Your sense of touch still works. You're just not paying attention to it. Your brain's not paying attention to it. If your brain's paying attention to anything out there, you can't sleep. So that's all sleep hygiene is. Don't stimulate yourself late at night. Like, don't go exercise. Don't watch scary movies. Don't do exciting, fun things when you're trying to get to sleep. get rid of the stimulation and get rid of the light. That's all sleep hygiene is. Now, one little trick to kind of help you in that arena, because we don't spend 3 hours to 3.5 hours of getting people to sleep. Nobody does that really. So we can accelerate some of this stuff by lowering the temperature. If we lower our body temperature, that's one of the cues for going to sleep. Right. This is why we give kids baths before they go to sleep, right? You don't give a kid a 100-degree bath, right? You give the kid an 85, 88-degree bath. Well, that's lowering their body temperature. They're getting a little cooler, and then you're putting them in, the powder and the onesies because you're taking sensation away, you're taking touch away, that everything's soft and smooth.
Very cool.
Right? So now you're getting people, you're making these kids ready for sleep by you're actually decreasing the light, you're decreasing the stimulation, you're talking to them in soothing tones, you're reading them monotonous books that they know every word of because that's soothing. It's not nearly as soothing to read some really exciting book they've never heard of, right? Or they've never been exposed to before. That's the reason kids like these repetitions. I mean, freaking Sneetches. I used to be able to say the Sneetches from start to finish without a book. Like I knew every freaking word in there. I probably read it 1,000 times to 3 different kids. And they always wanted to hear it, right? It had a rhythm. Dr. Seuss had this rhythm, this hypnotic rhythm in it. Boom, ba-boom, ba-boom, bam, boom, ba-boom, ba-boom, bam. Every time kids get trained. So this is all you're doing to yourself. Think about hunter-gatherers. Think about people that live without electricity. Sun goes down. What are you going to do? Go sit near wherever you dwell and maybe have a fire.
And chill.
And chill.
Just enjoy the day, tell a story, and then before it's like when you go camping, right? You're out but well before 11 p.m. because you probably walked around, you're in the sun all day, and then you don't need an alarm clock. You're just you're out and you wake up when basically the sun comes up and you feel, oh man, that's the best feeling. You wake up, it's crisp, and you just had this awesome night's sleep. Now that's what me and my son, we've done that in the back. Just going in the backyard even helps, because it's cooler.
What happens is you actually feel more connected to your environment, right? You're training yourself to be part of the earth instead of the passenger on it.
Very cool.
You're actually part of this organism that we call the earth, and you're an important part of it. Just like ants are an important part of it, and the sun's an important part of it, and plants are, like, humans are a part of it. And we like to think of ourselves as being exclusive to where, like, we're like visitors in this world, or we're, or I don't know, spectators or something. But we're not tourists. We're not tourists of the planet. This is part of who we are. This is like the whole concept around grounding. This is why, go figure, it makes a lot more health sense to eat things that naturally grow on this planet. They either they grow, or they eat things that grow, and they grow, and like we eat those things, and everything's connected.
I feel like singing the song from Lion King right now, The Circle of Life. The circle.
And the more connected you are to your environment, the healthier you feel. Right? Like, people experience this all the time. Like, man, I just go out and walk in nature and I feel so much better.
Right.
Yeah. No shit, Sherlock. Like, that's how you evolved. Like,
keep it simple, stupid.
Years.
Right. We can't outdo our biology in the span of 100 years. We can't just all of a sudden decide, no, I'm better than that, man.
Yeah,
I crush genetics.
Right.
Check. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like it's just basically the holistic approach, right? To taking care of yourself. It's the long game.
To me, that's the really minimalist approach. It's like, hey, let me eat, sleep, and move the way I evolved to do, and let me see how I feel then. And then I can make adjustments from there. But why wouldn't I just get those basics down? Like, you don't, you just don't have to. Like, one of the things that drives me crazy, you just alluded to it, in some form or fashion, it seems like there's all these people who want to biohack, and they're just biohackers. I'm like, great, you're 35 years old, you're in a 200,000-year-old body, 2.5 million years into evolution, and you think you've got this figured out now? Like, you're smarter than all of this millions of years of evolution. You're smarter than that because you've read a couple of books, you have a couple of degrees. No, you're a moron. You didn't learn a damn thing. You learned a bunch of facts, half of which wrong, and now you think you know everything. Yeah, sure. I always tell people the original biohackers is pharma. Everybody hates pharma. That's who the original biohackers were, right? Oh, you have this disease? well, if we give you this medication, it will do this to that receptor, and it'll trick this cell into thinking that, and then you won't have that symptom and that disease anymore. Oh, you're really tired because you don't sleep enough? Well, how about you do this biohack and you'll feel more energetic during the day?
Right. Or just guzzle liters of freaking coffee and stimulate yourself with whatever. Sure. Yeah, that too. So I wanted to just, if I can chat briefly about the symptoms that you described earlier about like being fat, tired, sluggish, mental fog, irritability. Those sound really similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. So, and like some of my buddies that are hurting, I noticed that, man, they're not getting sleep. And I just, I'm not a clinician, but I can only imagine that if you are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, I can assume that getting more sleep is probably really important. But then again, getting sleep is probably the thing that's going to be the hardest, because like you said, your nervous system is jacked up. Like you're constantly under like a threat scenario. So could you speak to that? Could you give some clarification? Because for me, it's fascinating, but it just seems like there's a bit of confusion as to how to actually go forward when you have something like a diagnosis like post-traumatic stress disorder, but you're not sleeping, but that's the one thing that you need.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the difficulty for me with that is I don't know. There almost needs to be two different types of PTSD, because I do think that there's post-traumatic stress issues associated with, childhood or, whatever, something horrific happening, watching a family member die or being raped or, being, physically assaulted, or like something that could happen in your 20s or something like that could cause some lifelong stuff if you don't handle it. But what I find, in military, athletes, law enforcement, kind of across the board, when people have PTSD, there's almost always a pretty significant exposure to things that could cause traumatic brain injury. So, and I want to say around 2008, 2009, there was an article in JAMA where they were doing something called a DTI, which is this really, really high resolution MRI, essentially, and they could actually see like a single neuronal track breaking in a brain, right? And so that was like the most mild of a TBI. That wouldn't be enough to affect your performance or for you to realize something had changed. But we could see this little change. Well, they found that change. They found that change on the acceleration changes of a roller coaster. So they weren't hitting their heads or anything, just that lateral acceleration of 1 point, I want to say it was like 1.1, 1.19 something, 1.09 Gs. So a little over a G of force caused a mild traumatic brain injury. Well, if you look at people in the military or law enforcement, whatever, you look at people who operate heavy equipment, people who have been boxers, football players, soccer players, like all this stuff, shooting a machine gun inside of a concrete room, that's like 35 Gs every time you pull the trigger. So what's that doing, right? In the SEAL teams, like depth groups, the fast boats transit around 65 Gs on average. They're peaking over 100 Gs. Hard parachute openings are multiple Gs. Obviously breaching doors, being, training, Carl Gustavs are ridiculous. They're like hundreds of Gs.
Oh, jeez, those things are brutal.
It's like 200 Gs or something shooting a Carl Gustav round. So like that's just head injury, guaranteed moderate, at least a moderate TBI. And then of course people fall and all this other stuff. And you tend to do combatives when you're also in the military. And so there's a lot of exposure to that. And I just think that's becoming a lot more common, and especially with, these extreme sports that people do, like, kids are, doing crazy stuff on skis and bikes and skateboards, and, they're taking falls and hitting their head. And what we know now is that this causes inflammation in the brain. And when the brain is inflamed, it's essentially like, your knee being inflamed. Your knee just doesn't work as well, right? And it hurts all the time. Well, your brain doesn't have any pain senses in it, sensing fibers in there. So you don't know that your brain hurts, but you just don't feel quite right. Well, just like if you had a swollen knee because it was injured and I didn't do anything and I just kept doing everything that I always do you think that knee would heal? Like, maybe over a really
yeah.
long period of time. And the same thing is true with your brain. So what we have to do is we have to get nutrients into that region of the brain. We have to get more blood supply into that region of the brain. We have to cause that area of the brain to fire more, because when cells fire, that's when they're doing their work, and that's when they can get rid of waste, and that's when they can bring in nutrients. The more activity the cells have, the faster they can clear any type of damage, and the faster they can lay down alternative pathways to get around damaged areas. And every aspect of your person is changed when your brain changes, right? We've seen this with strokes, right? Somebody gets a stroke and it changes everything about them. If it's severe enough, it changes their speech, it changes their movement, it changes their affect, emotions, like their facial expressions are so different you can hardly recognize them. Like everything is different about that person. Well, the same thing's happening with mild and moderate traumatic brain injury. It's just smaller, right? It's happening to a lesser degree, but it's making you more emotional labile. It's interfering with your ability to solve problems and pay attention, because it's just more energy intensive, right? You're dealing with a damaged system. You're trying to do the same amount of work you always do with a damaged system. And so you need more energy to do that. And it's more of a struggle, and you feel more tired. And then we're these species, there's only species that can like examine ourselves and then criticize ourselves and say, oh man, I just got to push through this. And now you're making it even worse. So I find that people with brain injuries don't sleep very well. And we know, as a matter of fact, your cognitive functioning decreases 20 to 30%. Like every night you don't get enough sleep. So you just miss a couple of hours of sleep, and you're 20 to 30% less capable the next day. And then you do the same thing the next night. You're the same thing. And then after a while, our introspection decreases and we just go, oh, this is normal. This is how I feel. And when I get people, like there's all these 30-day, 60-day, 90-day challenges out there. I have a 7-day challenge. Make sleep your number one priority for 7 days. Get 8 to 9 hours of sleep every single night for 7 nights in a row. And then you be the judge. Like, do whatever you want to after that. I've never once had anybody do that and go, I don't really feel any better. You know what they say? They say, Jesus, it's like somebody turned the lights on. Like, where did all this come from? Like, the world is so much brighter. There's so many more colors. Like, there's so much more interesting stuff in the world. I feel so much more excited about life. I feel so clear. I have so little pain. I feel so strong. Like, every single person who does this. I mean, and that includes PTSD. That includes, when I'm working with spec ops guys, I can't separate that, right? They've all had so many damn TBIs. They're uncountable. They're in the thousands of TBIs. So if they start having, if they're like, if their wife or buddy calls me and says, hey, so-and-so suicidal and like dark and grim, and we can't get this guy out of his house, he's drinking himself to death and da-da-da-da. Well, that's his PTSD manifestation. But that's after years of traumatic brain injury, and that's after a significant period of poor sleep, usually years. But there's an area of science now called chronobiology, where they're finding that almost every psychiatric illness that we know of is preceded by a period of poor sleep. So if somebody has a schizophrenic break, they always fail to sleep well before they have a schizophrenic break. If people have bipolar and they have a manic episode or a depressive episode, there's interference of sleep. People just have depressive episodes. If they have major depression disorder, it's preceded by poor sleep. So, I mean, there's nothing really surprising about it. It is by far the most important thing that you can do. And, if you just want to be really super simplistic about it, PTSD is basically a malfunctioning brain. Right. When does the brain repair? When you're sleeping. When does it recalibrate? When does it flush out toxins and bring in more nutrition and get set? Like, I always tell people the simplest way to think about this is the purpose of sleep, like the activity of sleep, that overarching thing. And we could break it down into minutia, but if you just look at the whole concept of sleep, the whole concept of sleep is designed to get your brain and your body ready for the next day. And the more you do today, the more your brain and body is going to try to be able to do that same amount the next day. So this is how you're actually progressing. Well, if you don't sleep enough, that means you don't repair enough. You don't regenerate enough. You don't re-nourish enough. But you still have to do tomorrow. The alarm clock's still going to go off.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you going to get that energy from? You're going to take it from your body. That now becomes catabolic. You start using your body as fuel to operate your body. Instead of using the nutrients from the environment to pull that in and use that as fuel to get better, you're actually breaking down your own tissues to provide yourself the sustenance to move forward through the day because you didn't get enough sleep.
It makes a lot of sense. That makes a tremendous amount of sense. So somebody who essentially their sleep cycle is broken, with your clients, what do you do? I mean, they're not getting any sleep. They feel like shit. The performance has gone way down. Where do you go from there?
Well, like I said, I usually start with just metrics. So it's a lot of introspection. I make them read a lot. I talk to them a lot, but I make them read a lot, and with the number one goal of getting them to value sleep. Once they value sleep, and I don't mean, hey, I feel sleepy, I wish I slept better. I mean, they have to value sleep and realize that, oh, this is the most important thing that I can do for the rest of my life to achieve any goal that I want for the rest of my life. Right? Your ability to shape your future to the way you want it to be, hand in glove with sleep. You don't sleep enough, you aren't going to reach those goals, and you aren't going to enjoy them if you do reach them, because it affects your mood and your ability to perceive joy anyway. So, everything's perspective. Like, all this stuff is happening around us, but we're all processing that, right? So you and I can see the same thing. We process it. We can even process that we saw something slightly different, but we sure as hell are going to say there's different meanings to what we saw. And the less sleep you get, the more negative your meaning you ascribe to things. So I get people to really value sleep. Then I get people to really measure their sleep. And some people are anti-technology and they just want to journal. That's fine with me too. Like, you just want to journal, do that. If you want to wear Oura rings and Fitbits and Whoops and Garmin watches, whatever the hell you want to do, I don't care. Just measure it. You can't improve something if you don't really know what's going on.
Right.
Measure it. And then there's some pretty simple things that most people know of, like, decrease the amount of stimulation, right? Like, not just behavior we're talking about, but like, don't take stimulants. If you use Adderall or something like that, do that only in the morning. If you drink coffee, cut that off around noon or something. Mm-hmm. Make sleep a priority. Set up a sleeping environment. Make it dark. Make it cold. Make it a ritual. Be very consistent with when you go to bed and when you wake up. Whether or not you need to get up that early, get up that early every day. Go to bed at that time every day. This is for people with sleeping problems, right? Like, I don't prescribe that to everybody, but if you're having difficulty sleeping, the best thing you can do is be super regimented for a while. It's like anything else. It's like exercising. It's like nutrition. You have to, you have to be a little obsessive and over the top with you're really out of shape to get back in shape. But once you're in shape, you don't have to be that obsessive anymore to maintain it.
Right.
Like,
that initial inertia has been moved and there's momentum now.
Yeah. And sleep's the same way. So if somebody's just really broken, I'm like, man, this is like, you figure it out, but like, this is your regimen. I'm going to bed at this time every night. Getting up at this time. You have a bedtime alarm. It's like, this alarm goes off 1 hour from now, I'm going to be asleep no matter what. So now that this alarm went off, this is time to shut my day off. Turn the television off, turn my computer off, turn my phone off, put my kids away, like whatever happened, like, I'm going to bed in an hour. I'm going to be asleep in an hour. So this alarm clock is just as important as the alarm clock that wakes you up in the morning, because that time is time in bed, and that time is not negotiated. Just like you can't negotiate with your boss, oh, I'm not going to come in at that time because that doesn't work for me. No, this is what time you start work. This is what time your kids go to school. This is, what age you retire at. Like, there are things that are set that are beyond your control. And this sleep has to be just as important as that. And you go to bed and you don't have any, of course, you do all the light stuff. Here's a big psychology tip, is you don't have a clock. Not because of EMFs and not because of light, but because if you look at a clock and you know what time it is, you start doing mental math and you start waking yourself up and you start worrying about how much sleep you're going to get.
Yeah, that's totally true. As soon as you look at it, like, oh, fuck, I got 3 hours to go.
Yeah, and you start calculating. Well, if I don't go to the gym this morning and I sleep this much, I could get this much sleep. And now you're waking yourself up and you're worried about how you're going to perform and feel the next day. Whereas if you just say, I go to bed at this time, my alarm goes off, I know an hour An hour from that, I want to be asleep. So I'm going to get in bed 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever, after my alarm goes off. Then I'm going to have an alarm clock that's set that I don't need to see, because until that alarm clock goes off, I'm not getting out of bed. You get up and go to the bathroom if I have to, but like, I'm not getting out of bed. Doesn't matter if I wake up and I go, well, maybe my alarm clock's going to go off in like 15 minutes. It feels like it could be later. No, you don't look. Don't ever look. Wait till the alarm clock goes off. If you wake up and you're not sure what time it is, and you're like, I don't know, like maybe my alarm's about to go off. Maybe it's the middle of the night. Doesn't matter. Just lay there, relax, breathe, progressive muscle relaxation, breath work, meditation, whatever it is that settles you out. Don't think about the future. Don't think about the past. Don't worry about stuff you have no control over. Just lay there, be in the moment, focus, relax. And then whenever your alarm clock goes off, you wake up or you get out of bed. And if your alarm clock goes off 15 minutes later, well, big deal. You got 15 minutes of meditation out of it.
Right.
You're going to have a better day. If your alarm clock's not going to go off for 3 or 4 more hours, you're going to fall back asleep.
Right. Right. That's huge. That's great. That's great advice. I know my wife's going to be happy to hear that, because for her, that's the biggest concern, that she gets up and she has a really hard time going back to sleep, because what does she do? She looks at the phone, or she looks at the alarm clock, which is in the room.
Right.
So I said, wait, hold on a sec. Just turn that alarm clock over, and then
put it in the drawer. If you have a bedside table, you'll still wake up, and just put it in the drawer.
Yeah.
And here's another tip. This is another tip. It works for men and women, but this is something I give to women a lot more than I give to men. There are various reasons for this. There's nothing sexist about this. This is a physiological thing. But I always tell people, if you know that an active mind is something that either interferes with your ability to go to sleep or interferes with your ability to go back to sleep if you wake up in the middle of the night, I say you take a piece of paper and you draw a line, vertically down. You split that paper in half, and on the left side, you write your to-do list. Literally everything. It doesn't matter if you're not going to do it for a month. Just like everything that you can think of that you need to do, put it on the left side. On the right side is called the to-worry list. This is stuff you don't have any control over, but you still don't want to forget to worry about it. So you put it on that side of the list. You put everything you have to worry about. I'm going to worry about this. I'm going to worry about that. I'm going to worry about this. I'm going to worry about this. I'm going to stress over that. Okay. So now when you go to bed, you make yourself the agreement. Hey, the best I'm ever going to be able to handle this list, the most productive I'm ever going to feel, the most joy I'm ever going to feel in my life while handling this list is after I've slept well. So until my alarm clock goes off, I'm not doing anything on that list. I'm not thinking about anything on that list. I'm not planning. I'm not regretting. I'm not ruminating. I'm not worrying. Everything on that list is going to be handled when I wake up in the morning. And if you realize at 2 a.m. that you forgot to put something on the list, wake up and put it on the list. And go back to lay back in bed and go, I'm not going to think about any of that stuff.
Huge. That's very valuable.
If you do that and you don't look at the clock. Now, keep in mind, this isn't as simple as a decision. This is, sort of like learning how to meditate. There's a lot about this that you're actually controlling your mind and your behavior, which is why the motivation is important first. You have to value it. It has to be the most important thing in the world to you. Now you're going to go to bed. You're going to get great sleep. You're going to put all your worries aside because you've got it all planned when you're going to handle that stuff, how you're going to handle that stuff. Even if you can't handle that stuff, you can't handle it in the middle of the night. You won't be as capable the next day if you don't get good sleep. So now we're going to really value this sleep time. It's going to help us get everything done on the list. I'm not going to look at the clock because I don't care what time it is. Until my alarm clock goes off, I'm not getting out of bed. You combine those 3 things together, that's 90% of the solution for 95% of the people.
That's that is extremely valuable, and really breaking that culture of I'll sleep when I'm dead here, I think is
you'll get there a lot sooner.
Right? Like it's pervasive everywhere. The idea that no, you need to crush it. So you need to go hard every day, 4 hours sleep, and just keep on going, like smash as much caffeine and stimulants as possible to make the engine go. But that's not playing the long game. So that's why I love your message.
Chronically sleep deprived people die on average about, I want to say 14 years.
Whoa. Wow.
So you will sleep when you're dead. You'll get there a lot sooner. If that's your goal, you can squeeze out an extra hour of life every day, and you'll just end it, a decade
Well,
and a half sooner.
yeah, no kidding. My life goal essentially, near like when I'm cresting at the end, when I'm in my golden years, to be able to go run with my grandkids. And I know that's going to be a gargantuan effort, but it's the long game. And I know I need sleep. And I
Right.
spoke with I don't know if you know Dr. Kelly Starrett,
Yeah.
and same idea. K-Star, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I asked him, like, was he valued the most? And he's like, I prioritize sleep at all costs. Sleep at all
Yeah.
costs. And it makes sense. Like those high performing individuals, I think we have this perception that to be high performing, you got to just cut out sleep, but it's the exact opposite, because
Right.
if like everything that we just went over here, your performance means everything to a high performer. And if it's not at the maximum potential, well, then you're just changing yourself and everybody else around you. So I love the message. I love the research. I love everything that you're doing. It's been hugely influential for just my teaching practice and what I do now, because that's something I cover with my clients as well, because there's a lot of broken sleep patterns and I'm guilty of it as well. So why don't you let people know kind of how they can get in touch with you and what you got going on, so they can get a hold of you?
Yeah. So, anybody can access my information at, I don't know all of my social media handles because honestly, I don't go on them very often.
Right.
But if you go to my website, which is just DOC, short for doctor, so Doc Parsley, docparsley.com. Blogs, there's videos, there's podcasts I've done. If you want to let my people know, we can share this podcast on that side as well. Whenever it comes out, share a link to that. There's videos, there's lectures, there's blogs. You can get my ebook. You can order my book off that. The supplement that I designed is, that's accessible on that side as well. That was something I designed when I was working with the SEALs to get them all off of sleep drugs. And then my individual consulting, I'm working with a guy named Dan Stickler. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's very, very similar work to me. He's a physician that provides very similar services and very similar mindset and belief systems. And he lives here in Austin, and he has a clinic called Apeiron, which is spelled Apeiron, Apeiron. Actually, it's Apeiron ZOH, which is Latin, I guess, I think Latin for limitless life. So apparently, anyway.
Intense.
So we do. He does very similar work to me. I'm obviously more slanted towards sleep than any of the other clinicians, but I think there's 8 centers worldwide with this, and so I'm moving my consulting efforts into doing that with him as opposed to being the one-man show I've been for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. So we'll be sure to get all of that in the show notes. One last parting question for you. What makes you hard to kill?
You know the answer to
that. Yeah, I think I do. I'm assuming it revolves around prioritizing sleep.
I sleep 8 to 9 hours every night.
Nice.
I mean, I can't say every night, but damn near every night.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And
I'm turning 50 in a couple of weeks, and I'm still making gains in my life. I'm still improving my cognitive abilities. I'm still improving my strength and agility and endurance and all of the other stuff. So, I come from 2 professions that didn't value sleep. Right. I mean,
right.
The SEALs don't care about sleep. That means you're weak, and the medical community doesn't care about sleep. So, ironically, it took a threat of congressional action to just get them to limit doctors' working hours so they weren't killing as many people. But it's still the number 3 cause of death in America is iatrogenic, which just means you're killed by healthcare practitioners' mistake. And so it's heart disease, cancer, and medical error. Those are the 3 things that are most likely to kill you in this world. It's not like I've slept well my whole life, and so like I'm this great physical specimen to show you the potential. It's like, no, I didn't sleep at all for like 25 years or something.
Making up for lost time.
I ground myself to the bone, and I didn't realize how important this was until I started teaching the SEALs about it. And now I've made it my number 1 priority. And I can tell you that, like, I definitely look, feel, and perform better at 50 than I did at 40.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about it. And that's the only difference. So I've been just as serious about my health and performance my whole life. But it was definitely deteriorating. Like, I remember feeling old when I was turning 40, going, man, life's really catching up with me. And now I'm turning 50. I'm like, no, I feel great.
Right. It doesn't have to be that way. Just because we get that message that it's all downhill after 30, 40, whatever it is. I'm totally guilty of it just until recently. My knees, my back, my brain. I was just like, well, that's it. I'm getting close to 40. I guess it's time to pack her in. But it's good to hear a really positive message from yourself. And I know this is going to impact the Hard to Kill community very well, especially up here in Canada. I don't know how much exposure there is to your research, but I'll definitely make sure that as many people, especially up here, veterans and first responders, get the message through the podcast and everything else that you're putting out, which is just freaking awesome. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's amazing how things work, from listening to you talk on a buddy's podcast 5 years ago to me talking about your stuff in high school to now you being on my show. It's been a real treat. So really appreciate you coming on, and I wish you all the best in the future, Kirk.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Cheers.
All right, cheers.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. You can find out more about training, nutrition, and mindset at davemorrow.net. Be sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram at Dave Morrow PT. And don't forget, strong people are hard to kill.